Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Happy Saturday, folks.
Happy Saturday.
Bigfoot and the Bunny, and we are psyched. I'm jazzed for today's show.
Yes, we are. We both are.
Yeah, we definitely are. We got a great guest. We're going to tell you all about him in a moment. But we did want to point out something. Last Saturday on Bigfoot and the Bunny, we spotted a light anomaly talking to Susan Walter, who paints angels and talks to angels and is an NDE. And we just thought it was odd, and I pointed it out, and I wanted to clip that part because I'm sure a lot of you missed it. I did see it in real time.
It happened really fast.
It's just real quick, and I'm not saying it's paranormal. I'm not saying it's aliens, but maybe it's aliens, maybe it's angels. I don't know, but it's worth looking at. I mean, possibly it's just a reflection, something like that. But it's unusual because in the 2-hour show, it never happened again, and it didn't appear that there was anybody in the room with her, to create that reflection. So I'm going to play that for you now.
Language, almost written language, where light language is much more about frequency. Because when you get down to everything is still frequency and vibration.
It is. And I have to admit, I just saw a weird reflection in your camera. And I don't know if that.
Yeah, and I know my arms are on my desk, so occasionally it's kind of vibrating.
Yeah,
I'm literally setting out my art desk.
It was like a light that went from like behind you and just shot up to the upper left corner.
Not a
so I'll have to.
Not
a dust storm, not an IR. Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I don't know if it was a reflection of something debunkable, but later after the show, I'm going to rewind that because that just caught my eye. That's good. And sometimes
none of us are ever alone, because when you get down to everything is
yeah, and that was it. So hopefully you guys are able to see that. If you watch on your phone, it's hard to see, but it's blue and it moves really quick and kind of zipped, and it actually looked like it was coming toward the camera, but very kind of interesting. I don't know. I love when things happen or some kind of phenomena on the show. We've had all sorts of EVP like things and voices in the background occur. Some of that is just due to the nature of streaming, and some of it we believe is not, because they say specific things and relevant, and we've had some interesting experiences with that. I'd like to say hello, Bob Burnell, Robin Kale, Sandy Griffith, and I'm going to say SFPIYT. How you guys doing? Thank you for joining. So we have an awesome guest for you. We're going to get right into things. Let me get up his bio here. Let me tell you about him. His name is Dr. Scott Taylor. He is the president of the Expanded Awareness Institute. EAI helps people curious about near-death experiences explore what that experience means to them and to our culture as a whole. Scott's gift is the ability to make the exploration of the non-physical universe accessible to the curious. Scott is also the author and voice of 6 best-selling CDs of guided meditations on near-death experiences called the Into the Light series. He is a spiritual teacher, speaker, and researcher on near-death experiences. So we're going to get right into that and bring him right on. Hello, Dr. Scott. How are you?
I am awesome. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I have been really looking forward to this. So what fun. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Kaz. Hello, Anne-Marie. Lots of people out there today. So this is fantastic. I'm very psyched. Your albums are on Hemisink. Which here they are not paying me to wear this shirt. Well, we're actually
nice
fans.
Commercial. Way to go.
We're fans. I bought the t-shirt because I really do like it, and I want people to try that stuff. But we'll get into the Hemisink in a little bit. You specialize in shared near-death experiences, which is a concept I've never heard of, and it's fascinating. And I'd love to hear about it. Maybe you can tell
Please.
us a little bit about that.
Okay. So, shared death experiences happen when somebody is making their transition and there's, say, a person bedside. And when the person making the transition leaves their body for the last time, the person bedside gets to experience that also. So two people experience it at once, and that's actually how I got into this whole near death thing, was because I'd had a shared death experience back in the 80s. Do you want me to tell you the story?
Absolutely.
please.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is 1981, and I'm in love with a woman. Her name is Mary Frances, and she and her son Nolan had been out sailing all afternoon on Lake Washington, which is in southern Minnesota. And on their way home, Mary Fran had to turn off of a gravel road left onto a county road. And when she, as close as I can figure out, when she went to check for oncoming cars, she looked directly into the sunset and didn't see the car coming. And she pulled out right in front of it. It hit her in the driver's side door, and she was killed instantly. Nolan, who just turned 7, had this mortal head wound, and they immediately transported both Mary Fran and Nolan to Rochester, Mayo, in Rochester, Minnesota. And it took him about 6 days to make his transition. That winds up being important because during the 6 days between the accident and when Nolan made his transition, that allowed the time for the relatives to come from all over the country to lend their support. Nolan was the first grandchild in a family of 9 kids. Mary Fran was number 3 of 9, and which meant that there were a ton of relatives. I mean, your brothers and sisters and spouses and girlfriends and boyfriends and uncles and aunts. And I mean, it's just a ton of people wound up coming in and holding vigil with Nolan. Well, what all of those people, what that meant was that we got to divvy up the time and just be with him and support him. So as it turns out, I had the shift with Mary Fran's eldest sister, Janie, from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. in the 6th day. And we were with Nolan. He was in a coma, but what we know about people who are making their transition are folks that are in comas, but very often they can, hearing is the last sense to go. And so we were in the room with him and we read him stories. We told him how this 50 odd people were making do in this little bitty waiting room across the way. Some of the brothers and sisters had raided the couch around Mayo and stolen cushions so that they could, have a place to be on the floor. Anyway, so it was just, we were trying to keep his spirits up and tell him these fun stories. Anyway, it gets to be about 4:45 in the morning, and Janie, who was a trained trauma nurse, she worked in emergency rooms and in intensive care units, kind of gave me the signal, and she went down and she looked at the charts, and then she looked up at all of the myriad of monitors that were surrounding Nolan's bed, and she just shook her head, and it was clear that she knew where this was going. And so Janie held out her hand to me, and the two of us pulled up chairs next to Nolan's head, and we told him that we loved him very much, and that he had been a very brave young man, and that he had been fighting so hard to stay alive and to stay with us. But if his mother should come, remembering that she died 6 days before, but that if Mary Fran would come, that meant that it was okay for him to go with her. And we said our goodbyes, and then it was roughly 5 o'clock in the morning, and we left, and another shift came in. Well, about 45 minutes later, the nurse came in and woke up all these 50 people laying in the waiting room and said that it was time. And we filed into the hospital room. And just as it turns out, I was one of the last people to enter into the room, and it was already 4 deep around the bed. So I wound up sitting on the windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie. And we just waited. And, you could watch that heart monitor do its beep thing. Mm-hmm. And at some point it started to really slow, and then it does that ominous thing when it flatlines.
Sure.
And when Nolan flatlined, what I witnessed was Mary Fran coming across the veil and scooping Nolan up out of his physical body. And the reunion between mother and child was just exquisite. And somehow I got to participate in that. I got to be there and be in that emotion and be there witnessing a mother welcoming her son back home.
That kind of unconditional love. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then to my surprise, the two of them then turned to me, embraced me, and then the three of us went to the light. Wow. And now remember, I'm just sitting on the windowsill. I don't have any physical trauma, but I am in the light with Mary Fran and Nolan. And we had time together. We had time to communicate with each other, to express our affection and our love for each other. We had a chance to say goodbye and just be with each other for a while, remembering that this doesn't happen with English words. It happens on a telepathic or at a heart level, complete understanding about what's going on, but it's not in words as we know them.
Is it almost like a stream of consciousness?
Yeah, almost. It's like you're able to step into somebody else's thoughts and emotions, and they're able to step into yours. It's like you become, I'm not sure one person, but we are certainly, the three of us were united, and the transmission between all of us was instantaneous and completely understood. And so we remained that way for a while. And I don't know what a while means, because time in the non-physical world is a whole lot different than it is here in the physical. But we had time for our we had time to be with each other and to say our goodbyes. And then Mary Fran took Nolan by the hand, and the two of them turned and went further into the light. And I came back to my body in the hospital room. That's part A. Part B is that something else happened at the same time, because I was fully present with Mary Fran and Nolan in the light, and I was fully present in the room with the other grieving friends and relatives. Now we had a word for it. It's called bilocation, where I had two distinctly separate consciousnesses in different locations. And I know this to be true because as I was sitting there on the windowsill, I was when I'm in the light, it is the most extraordinary thing. It's unbounded love and compassion and ecstasy and joy. It's such a profound sense of being united with them and everything in the universe, which is loving and good, that all of that emotion, all of that love was just trying to burst out of me. And I know because my face had such joy on it. It was, it felt like my face actually would break from all of this light trying to get out of my body. And I had enough presence of mind to know that if anybody were to look over in my direction, it would not have been appropriate for the room. It might have been really misunderstood. And so I wound up just covering my face with my hands so until I could regain composure. And that really didn't happen until that other consciousness that was with Mary Fran and Nolan came back into my body, and we were reunited as one consciousness. I could gather my wits about me, and then, take my hands down, and I could be in the room with the other grieving relatives, because, it was just moments before they'd lost a nephew or a cousin or a grandson. And so,
wow,
that's part B.
Thank you so much for telling us that story. I can tell it's an emotional story for you even today, even though this happened in the 80s.
Well, I need to make an amendment on that. Yes, it's emotional, but it's a very complicated thing for me, because in the moment of my greatest grief, I was in my greatest joy. And so when I tell this story, yes, there is profound sadness for the loss of Nolan and Mary Fran. But it's also, when I tell the story, I get to touch that exquisite place again. And so these are tears of joy, and they're tears of sadness, and it's all mixed together,
all intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to separate those two, and I just don't. It just doesn't happen.
That is amazing, and I love that you referred to it as bilocation, because they use that word also in quantum physics to talk about electrons doing identical things. It's separated. It could be distance, doesn't matter, but they'll have the exact same behavior. It's one of the mysteries, right? Kind of spooky stuff, as Einstein called it, about the quantum mechanics, right?
Well, when you talk to people who've had near-death experiences or shared death experiences, like mine, what you begin to realize is that everything is made up of the same stuff. We're all made up of this energetic, vibratory love that is the foundation of the universe. And, when we're here in the physical level, it's like we're defined by the words either or. I am me, and Kristen is Kristen, and Chris is Chris, and we're separate. But when we enter into the light, into the non-physical universe, it's not like that. Yes, I get to be me, but I am also you, and this microphone and this desk that I'm sitting at. all of it is made up of the same stuff, and we are intricately connected. And so this whole idea of spooky action at a distance, it's like Einstein used to call it. It makes complete sense because those two electrons are really bounded together by this vibratory nature of the universe, which is the love of the universe. And yeah, it makes complete sense to somebody who's had my experience or a near-death experience.
You're parking up.
Yeah, of course.
What we love to research, because this, sounds a lot like panpsychism that we talk about a lot, where we're kind of all made of the same stuff, and the ability of consciousness to hold it. That our animals and our plants can all hold some sort of fragment of consciousness, and that it can shift. And I think it explains some of the haunted phenomena when we talk about paranormal subjects, because I think they're all kind of correlated. And things like psychic abilities and things seem to come from the subconscious. We know from our attempts to remote view and doing remote viewing that there's a subconscious thing that seems to be connected to everything. And that information seems to come up, and then our brain tries to change it, because of our rational world and logical thinking.
Right.
And that's where we have problems, because we really need that.
Oh, it's really hard to talk about. Yeah, it's this is when I talk to remote viewers who've done it a long time. They'll say that, Scott, it isn't about placing your consciousness in a remote location. That's not what happens. There's no separation between here and there. It's about opening your mind to that location, which is also a part of you at some level. So it's about tuning your antenna versus actually sending your consciousness someplace.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Said, yes.
It is what it seems like, just tapping into that vein of the unconscious, that subconscious, that's just everybody has, and it connects us all. So that's a fascinating way to look at it. So I had never heard of a shared near-death experience. So that's intense.
I just talked to a woman the other day who shared death experiences happen in all different kinds of flavors. And for those of you who are steeped in the world of near-death experiences, they are about this close together. It's a lot of the same responses. You're entering into the same territories. There's just some minor differences between shared death and near-death experiences. But in a shared death experience, you get to share in the experience of the person making the transition. And it can be a little, like I kind of define mine that way, where we entered into the light and we just had a chance to be together and say our goodbyes. But, some people who have a shared death experience do the whole thing. I mean, they are with them with the guide that takes them to the tunnel. They go down the tunnel. They are in with the dead relatives at the reunion party. They get to meet the being of light who, helps you through the life review. They get to go visit the crystal cities and that area of life between lives. So it's, it can be really elaborate or it can be very simple. And it kind of depends on what you need is what I've come down to believe, that I had a need to say goodbye. I think they had a need to say goodbye too. and that was enough. And for some other people, maybe it was time for the e-ticket. They get the whole full meal deal here, and that's just wonderful.
Right. So, I'm sorry, I should have clarified my verbiage. This was a shared death experience, not a near-death experience, because
and up until about a year ago, I would have told you that I had a shared near-death experience. That was kind of the nomenclature of the time. But Raymond Moody came out with a book, and so did William Peters, who they have now landed on the nomenclature of shared death experience as to describe what happened to me. And so, okay, I'll go with that. For those of you that are interested, the first really big study with shared death experiences came out just about a month ago. It's at William Peters wrote the book. There's 800 people in his study. And if you read the book, I'm in there, so you can check out all different kinds of things on me.
What is the name of the book?
Please.
At Heaven's Door.
At Heaven's Door. I'll put that
At Heaven's Door. Hang on. Here, I'll do a little commercial for William.
Yes,
That's
please.
what it looks like.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
There you go. At Heaven's Door, William Peters. And what he came to believe through his study wound up being key components of what happened to me, meaning he believes and has taught for the last 10 years or so people how to have a shared death experience with someone that they care about. And he said kind of what key components of it are. One, that the person who so we have two people. One is the person making the transition, the other one that's dying, and the experiencer, the person who will go with them. And the experiencer needs to be in a calm, receptive state. Makes sense. And in my case, I had just been sitting on the windowsill, for about 45 minutes watching, Nolan's heart monitor go to 0. And I was just, there's not much to do when you're holding vigil like that. So, I was kind of in this half dazed, dozy state. Second, there needs to be a heartfelt connection between the experiencer and the person making the transition. And that clearly was the case between Nolan and I. I should explain that. Mary Fran had Nolan out of wedlock. The biological father disavowed any responsibility for Nolan, didn't want to be part of Nolan's life. And so Mary Fran, didn't tell Nolan who his biological father was. And when I came into their lives, Nolan desperately wanted to be like every other 7-year-old in the playground. He wanted to have a father too. And so I had that role with him, or starting to have that role with him. And so there was clear affection between the two of us. And the third thing that is, so a clear mind, affection between the two people. And the third thing is that the person making the transition is the one who has to reach back and pull you into the experience. So there's not really much you can do from being in the physical world to have this experience. It's the person making the transition that has to do the doing. And in my case, it was both, I think, hard to tell. Both Mary Fran and Nolan pulled me into the light. And we know that, there's all kinds of arrangements that are made between, say, like daughters and fathers, and saying, when you leave, Dad, be sure you come and tell me goodbye. And, that kind of thing.
Yes.
One of the things that surprised me, really just opened my eyes, was in 2/3 of the people who had shared death experiences were not local to the person making the transition. They were someplace else. They weren't bedside. They were at home or in a car or at work, or, I mean, all different kinds of places.
Mm,
And so distance doesn't make a difference.
right. Again, to that bilocation.
Bilocation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Speak-
Yep. And and one of the things that's really common is that the person making the transition will fly through the experiencer. You know, they'll come in and poof and fly through them. And in that moment when they, zoom through each other, all of this information is transmitted between the two. Um, it's like this gestalt. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
this thought ball where all of it takes place outside of time, and you can say volumes worth, but in 3D world here, it was just a moment. Poof.
In ufology, they would call that a download.
Yeah, I like that. It's an instantaneous download of massive amounts of emotion and thoughts and data, and in my case, it was, we had time together in the light more. It felt more like it was in physical time, but there's other folks who've had this with this fly through thing, and they know it was only momentary, but there was all of this communication that came through about love and respect and how much, I just talked to Janet Johnson not too long ago, and she describes the communication from her father who flew through her chest as a recognition of all of the caregiving that she had given him over the years, because he had a lingering illness, and a recognition of how meaningful that was to him. And so it's tough to describe how it could happen that quickly, but it's true.
Oh, we believe you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think we're capable of those things and observing massive amounts of information in a short time through psychic impressions. And a lot of this sounds a little like rescue mediums who go and try to cross a lost spirit, that is earthbound, and bring them into the light. Oftentimes the techniques they use involve things like calling out their relatives to invite them to walk or cross over.
Great.
Yeah.
It's
That soul rescue thing is really, my hat's off to the people who do that work. It's highly creative. It's one of the courses I used to teach at the Monroe Institute, and to find an individual who's stuck in this energetic pattern, and to get them out of that pattern, that thought, that the ability to recognize that there's something else that they want to have. Sometimes it takes a little creativity to have them actually see you and what you're all about. I just have deep affection for the people who do that work and do it all the time.
I would think it would be difficult work and kind of sad work to do all the time, seeing the lost souls and the reasons why they might still be earthbound. We hear lots of stories about that sort of thing. Death crossing kind of.
Chris, I've never really met folks who would call it sad work. I know, several folks. Well, some people say it's like being a taxi driver. You get the folks, you take them to the light, but on other times, the person who is being taken to the light will often invite invite them into the family reunion. And so they get to participate in this, in the joy of the person coming out of this stuck area and being able to see their loved ones again. And so they get a little bit of that joy leaking out, and that's really rewarding when that happens.
Well, I would think it would be, if you can see that. Our only experience, we only have one experience in trying to cross over a spirit, and it was a child spirit who had identified himself as Toby. And we were using ITC to talk to him because we could not get the psychic impressions on that kind of level where we could totally see him and see exactly what he was doing. But he was more than willing to talk in the same voice through our radios and things of that nature. Yep. And the things he said actually were really sad. He said things like, "Where's Mom?" And
he was sobbing.
And then he could hear him crying.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm stuck," and it's all in the same voice. Look at this recording; it's just crazy. And we attempted to cross him and walk him out of that area.
At least you got him to talk. That's great.
The family, or we didn't really get that aspect. All we could go on is that we had talked to him on several occasions at the same location, the same voice, same answers to questions like "How old are you?" and stuff like that, and always said the same answers. He was 7. And when we went back after doing this and reading up and trying to attempt it, we could never talk to him again. So we just hope it works. So when I say it's sad work, from our perspective, it was really sad to see him stuck there.
And it was a little validating trying to get him to go. We opened the gates for him and trying to get him.
It was literally a gated location. And
and it was validating, but it was also, it just was the whole.
So I'd love to get to that area, that place where you can see it. And that's one of the things we're working at. And I'm a big fan of Hemisink. And I can tell you that
we both are.
We both are. Yes.
Yep.
We've started the Gateway series, which we'll talk about a little bit. I've done some work on the Mediumship series. I think it's by Susan Geisman. We've listened and we talked to Joe Gallenberger.
Oh, yeah.
It was a great guy.
He's sweet.
Told us all about hard energy and that kind of stuff, and trying to beat the casino. And that was a fun interview, and he was a great guy. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what Hemisink is, because you have albums out there, and we kind of know, but I want our audience to really understand a little bit about the Monroe Institute. And
so
that seems to be.
Bob Monroe was the founder of the Monroe Institute, and he became famous because he wrote really the very first popular book about out-of-body experiences. And early on, what he wanted to do was to find a way to enter into these meditative states that would facilitate his out-of-body experience. And he happened upon a very old technology called binaural beats, which was discovered in the late 1800s. And what that's about is if you put a solid tone into one ear, say at 100 hertz, and you put another solid tone into the other ear at, say, 104 hertz, what the brain does is it tries to equalize those two tones. Well, if you're wearing headphones, it can't. Your brain can't, because they're inherently different. And so the brain sets up a third tone all on its own at the difference between the two, which is 4. And it starts to resonate at that third frequency. So if you were to put 100 and 104 hertz into your ears, the brain starts to resonate with that 4. You would go to sleep, because 4 hertz is delta sleep. That's where the brain likes to go. And that was wonderful. And so Bob Monroe said his genius was to take that technology and to say, well, what would happen if we layered this? And that's what he did. So his earliest, he calls them focus levels. His earliest vibration that he set up was one where you had this deep delta tone, which puts the body to sleep. And then he layered onto it another theta tone that allowed the brain to be awake and sharp and clear. And so you enter into a state called mind awake, body asleep.
Yes, and I'm just going to make a real quick comment on that. Having experienced that, it is a really interesting thing because I snore and I can hear myself snoring.
It's true.
And I'm fully awake and conscious in my mind, but my body is completely asleep. I can hear myself snoring, yet the tones are going on and I'm there.
Yeah, your mind is bright, awake, and clear. And that mind awake, body asleep state is where Bob Monroe did all of his out-of-body work. In the world of the Monroe Institute, that's known as Focus 10. Bob liked to use numbers because there wasn't any kind of cultural significance to them. And so that was where he started his explorations. And the lovely thing about binaural beat technology is that you can put it on, a CD or a tape or whatever your medium is, and if you are a willing participant and you have the headphones on, you will be in an expanded state of awareness, period. End of statement, stop, full stop, no exceptions. You are in that state. And so it's 100% effective. And you can allow people to stay in that meditative state for a long period of time. Say, our typical exercises were 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's a long time. It's more than enough time to practice your skills that you would use in navigating the non-physical universe. And that's why you would attend classes where they will help teach you the tools and techniques for, navigating in this world, as opposed to when you have a near-death experience, you are thrust into this world and you have no idea where you are. You don't know how to move around. You don't know how that you can ask questions. I mean, you're just there on your own. And it's so much different than being able to enter into these states and do it gradually with guidance and support. And anyway, so that's what Bob did. He created he took a binaural beat technology and he layered it. He called it Hemisink. That's the t-shirt that Chris has on. And it's very effective at helping people enter into and hold a meditative state. And so I'm a big fan, and all the albums that I've recorded have used Hemisink, and it's really lovely because I was able to tweak the Hemisink to get them really close as we can to the different common elements of an NDE. And so what I mean by that is, so you're interested in meeting your guide, the person who will take you from your physical body to the light. Well, that takes place at a certain vibratory window. And being in the tunnel, that's another one. If you are meeting with your dead relatives in this reunion that you have in the light, that has a slightly different frequency. If you're doing a life review, that's another one. If there's that wonderful area that is the life between lives, they call it the park. That has another frequency level. Park's actually really interesting because both the folks who have NDEs, they have the park, and then Bob Monroe, who uses a totally different cosmology, discovered the park. It's exactly the same place, just two different people, or two different traditions, I should say, coming together to discover the same area, which makes sense to me. if it's
It
out
does.
there, more than one person
Can
can
it-
make
can
that
culture
discovery.
affect that park area though? I've heard a lot of NDEs talk about how different cultures have a certain expectation upon
Mhm.
passing,
Mhm.
and that's kind of the experience they have. I think Rupert Sheldrake described in a short sentence like what is death. It's like dreaming and not waking up. So there's like your culture is influencing your consciousness to your expectations. So your experience may be different, although there's a lot of similarities between them all.
Yeah. I had this
Where do you
exact
go?
same conversation with Dr. Bruce Grayson just a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, did you?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he is, for those of you who don't know him, Dr. Grayson helped found the International Association for Near-Death Studies back in 1971. And he is a MD, PhD. He was at the University of Virginia. He was the head of psychiatry, and he was also the head of the Department of Perceptual Studies, where they studied things like near-death experiences and reincarnation and yada yada. Anyway, so he has a unique look on the world, and it has been his role for the whole time he was there. When somebody came in and said, "You know what? I think near-death experiences are caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain." And he would go, "Well, I have this whole university setting and all my training in 2 disciplines. Let's see if that's true." And he'd set up an experiment, and he'd come out and he'd go, "Nope, it's not true." And he'd write a paper about it and submit it to the Journal of Near-Death Studies, and it's published. And that was his role. Every idea that came down the pipe, would people say, "Well, it's ketamine," or it's, here's my favorite, it's the, you're remembering your birth, the whole, you're in the dark and you're going towards the light.
Going through the tunnel, yeah.
Yes.
You're going through the tunnel. So, and he'd go, and he would set up an experiment to try to figure out if that was true. And no. It's that, in my mind, that science is now settled. We have now copious amounts of data that tell us that NDEs are a unique and real phenomena, that our consciousness does not reside within our physical body. It resides in our non-physical body. And there's so much science around it now. We didn't have that before, but it's pretty much settled in my mind. There's still lots of interesting questions that are out there, but are NDEs real? Absolutely. Are shared death experiences real? Absolutely. And now what we do is move into more interesting question, which is, how do we make meaning out of the experience? There is the real question.
Mhm.
And I,
Sure.
bless their heart.
And what a joy it would be to be able to understand that meaning and
Mhm.
and not fear death.
Yes.
Move forth in life and live your life to the fullest without a constant fear of dying. Or
Well, I have to say that it's through the efforts of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, the Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies. There's another group out there called NDERF, NDE Research Foundation. That's their website, NDERF. And they have made a huge cultural shift, at least in the Western world, surrounding death. And hang on just a second. It's sitting right over here. I'm going to get something for you.
Okay.
Sure. We like show and tell.
Yeah.
And some interesting comments. So I'm just going to put up a few comments here. Robert Honing said, "You two are amazing and have a wonderful array of guests. Hats off and kudos. Thank you. Had to be said." Well, thank you very much, Robert. We appreciate that.
Nicely done, Robert.
Says, "Thank you for your story, Scott."
So I know this to be true, that a small group of dedicated people can really make a cultural difference. So think back like 10 years ago, and if I said, Kristen, I want you to come up with the image for death. And more than likely, this is what came to your mind.
Oh, right. I mean, now,
Right?
for people who are listening, you
Yeah,
just put up a picture of a Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
it's the
Some
Grim
people
Reaper.
will hear this
And,
audio.
the emotions that go along with that, when you take a look at this and you go, it's malevolent, it's lonely, it's capricious. I mean, this sigh just goes through humankind and rips you out of your life. It doesn't care, yada yada. I mean, it's a really ominous and dreadful kind of view of what death is like and who's causing death. It's the Grim Reaper. Well, if you were to go on to and ask now what the image is for death, this is more than likely what it is that you'll see. The light at the end of the tunnel. It has totally replaced the Grim Reaper in our popular culture. And
Yeah, that's true. That's
and
very
nobody said, there wasn't a law passed or the president didn't make a declaration or anything. It organically happened as people found out about it, because the light at the end of the tunnel it's personal. I mean, it's your trip
It's
to
your
the
turn.
light. And what's in the light? The light are all of your friends and family and pets. They're waiting for you to welcome you home. And the light is the love of God. It's the love of the universe. It is this extraordinary place where we are loved unconditionally. So it's a totally different way of thinking about our transition. And it is making a real difference in our culture. And you have to know it because Harry Potter in the last film had a near-death experience. It was a classic white light death experience. He fought Voldemort. Up he went. He found himself in a world of gray where Dumbledore was waiting for them.
Right.
Yes.
They walked off into King's Cross Station. He found out information that he couldn't have known before about the Horcruxes. And then
Cross that with something like Monty Python's Meaning of Life, where they goof on the idea of Grim Reaper, and he comes to the door and he knocks. They answer the door and he says, "I am death." And they're like, they just kind of ignore him. They're like, "Who's at the door?" It's just something about the reaping. Yeah,
yeah,
whole different view, right? So that
whole different view.
Wonderful.
And Homer Simpson had one. I mean,
Yes.
back when there were soap operas, I swear to God, every soap opera star had a near-death experience. So it's part of our culture now. And when people say, go to the light, they go, "Oh, I know what you mean." It's a wonderful thing.
It is. I like that. It's certainly a softer and more gentle way to deal with that, as there's so much grief, still involved. And as much as we know, it still hurts to lose a loved one deeply, emotionally, and, even spiritually.
Yes, absolutely. The loss of the physical presence, can be a profound loss, and rightly so. And that's okay.
I have a question for you out here. Let me bring this up real quick. Bob Burnell asks, if you have been reincarnated, once you die, do you instantly recall everything, since it is your second time going through this?
Do you instantly recall everything? Well, part of our transition process is having a life review. And the life review it's an extraordinary thing. And yes, instantly you remember everything that happened to you in this life. And you have available to you the information from your other lives, because they're out there. So I think that's what they're referring to.
But it does seem like there's some kind of a wipe when you come back. If you believe in reincarnation, and very few people really remember all their past lives. Although some people are able to tap into that, right? Through regression hypnosis and things
Sure.
like that.
I mean, look at the children that come out with remembering their past lives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a bunch of them, and
There's
yeah,
some
it's
pretty
spot on.
pretty amazing stories out there.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things the University of Virginia really delved into was evidence of people's past lives, and they with scars and with knowing intricate details about the past life. So that has been really well researched, and it's fun. So I got a brain twister for you. You ready?
Oh, we like these.
Okay.
Sure.
So what we know about the non-physical universe is that there is no time, not linear time like we know it here in the physical world. It's like all time is now. So, carrying that through logically, that means that all of our incarnations are happening simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're done with one life, you are done with all of your lives. And so what that allows us to do is to be able to say we have the ability to influence our other lives, which are being lived simultaneously to this one. Back when I was a Roman soldier, or I was a Polynesian island person, or in Africa, all of these different kinds of lives that I'm sure I must have led.
Mm-hmm.
I'm living them all concurrently, and we have, because it's all tied together, we have the ability to influence and give ourselves wisdom across lives. And I find that very comforting.
I think that's amazing. It's curious that you bring that up, because since we've started some of this gateway stuff, I've had a variety of dreams, and you had one as well, that really involved like timelines.
Yeah.
And I had this sense upon waking that what just happened was really happening, but just in a different timeline, perhaps, because they're all simultaneously happening at the same time. And I was shifting consciousness from one to another.
Yes.
And I had that very sense that you just tapped on when I woke up.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, maybe these things are really happening. And since there is no time, really, that linear time is just a human sensation,
right?
To get us through this 3D universe.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with you that these things actually are happening. And the idea that you might be able to influence one is awesome. I love that. It's fascinating.
Okay, so I'd like to take that one step further. You'll love this too, because this is worth the price of admission. Anybody who's listening today, this is probably the most important thing you'll hear this week. I'll do that. All right, here goes. So we have a life review, and in the life review, most people experience it from 3 different perspectives. You get to do it as yourself. You get to relive your entire life just as it happened, complete with every sensation and thought and emotion. And one of the cool things is you can speed it up or you can slow it down, and you get to really understand who you were and your growth for your entire life. That's part A. Part B is that you get to relive so typically what happens is that somebody goes in and they're having a life review, and there'll be like these balls that are just floating in the air, and you put your attention on one of the balls, and it inserts you into a scene in your life where you're interacting with somebody else. So you can be that person. So you get to do it as yourself, and you get to do it as the other person. So you get to understand their thoughts, feelings, sensations as the two of you have this exchange.
The
So,
impact of your actions.
yep. And very intimately, because that you get to understand how, that wonderful thing happened or whatever. And
It
then,
reminds me a little bit of Anubis and the scales. And
yeah. And so the third perspective is that of God's perspective. So how this interaction goes, you can see how it affects you, the other person, their family, the community, and, humankind at large. So you get to see how the ripple effect of that one transaction on these various communities. So, so let me give you an example. Say I'm the one that's I'm making my transition and I'm having a life review, and I find myself at a grocery store, and the young woman who's checking out my groceries is having trouble. I'm in a hurry. I snap at her and pretty much, insult her intelligence and competence. And frankly, I'm just being a first-class jerk. Okay. So I get to relive that as Scott being a jerk. I also get to relive it as Julie, the young woman who's behind the cash register. And what I get to find out is that this is her first hour on the job. Bob, the store manager, was supposed to train her in on the register. He didn't. He just started it and he said, "Oh, it's really intuitive. Just follow the prompts on the screen and you'll do fine." Well, it's not intuitive, and she got lost and she got frustrated. And then I snapped at her. Okay, so from God's perspective, what I got to see was when I leave, Julie cries. She has a fight with her boyfriend who goes home and kicks the dog, right? Now, here's the cool part. This is why it's worth the price of admission. When you go through a life review, you go through it with a being of light, and their job is to love you through the experience and to ask you one question and one question only, which is, what did you learn? What did you learn? There's no judging. You are the only judge of your own life. It's just this being of light to remind you to reflect on what it is that just happened. If you are aware, you can turn to the being of light and say, "Stop. I'd like to replay that scene again and do it differently." So we replay the scene again, only this time I go, "How's your day going?" And Julie says, "This is my first hour on the job, and Bob said that I should know how to run this, and I'm having troubles." And I go, "Stop. Don't worry about it. Take a deep breath. Take your time. We'll make sure that you can get through this and do it well." Because we've all been on a job our first day, and it's very nervous
And
so I
overwhelming.
speak kindly to her. And then from the omniscient point of view, I get to see that whole scenario about, kicking or having the fight with the boyfriend and kicking the dog and all that doesn't happen. It's an entirely different thing. Here's the cool part. That second scenario is just as valid as the one that happened in 3D. It sets up an alternative timeline, like you were talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just going to go there, and that's what I was thinking of. I'm thinking, all
Yep.
right, every possible scenario, if it all happens, and you think about this ever expanding, almost infinite universe that we now see is expanding exponentially,
Mhm.
with
Yep.
the possibility of planets that are just like our own, and people coming out, saying, it's more likely there is somebody that is just like you on another planet, mathematically living your life with maybe some slight variation. Makes you wonder if that's what's really happening in the scheme of things, right?
So what
all
that means,
Yeah.
Chris, is that we have a chance in our life review to fix our karma. We don't have to live another life again. But when we have this life review, we have to remember that we have choices and we have help. And that's what the being of light is for, is to help you think through and negotiate this experience of the physical, but do it differently, and do it with the kind of knowledge that we now have as having lived a whole life. You go, boy, I wish I'd spoken to that person differently. I wish I'd taken a left instead of a right. I wish I'd waited at that stop sign, whatever. It's a profound gift of a loving universe. This idea that we can actually alter our karma, alter how our life was lived, and that alternate scenario becomes part of the human knowledge that we have. It becomes available to everybody. And anyway, so I give that all to you as a gift, because it's not something that's talked about much. And I think it's a wonderful thing that the universe has lined up for us if we just know to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It kind of says all options are yes, and everything really happens.
Yeah.
And maybe in that life review, you're seeing the effects of all possibilities in like one download, because they all maybe exist simultaneously. Kaz Clark had a question. She asked, what about proven cases of reincarnation? Would that just be a case where you're having the simultaneous lives because there is no time? So you're just really remembering another consciousness that's occurring simultaneously, or is it something else?
I'm taking from that question that it's how do we know that Fred was Andy, who lived during the Civil War and died at the Battle of Shiloh and blah blah blah. There's a lot of research in that area, and in particular, one of the things the University of Virginia did was to study people who had specific scarring, and in a prior life, say at the Battle of Shiloh, great grandpa was killed with a sword through the side, and that scar then moved over into his next life, and there's a memory of that battle or dying in a certain way. That's the kind of thing that is out there. And as a young child, knowing way too much about a life in Japan of 10 years ago or something, it's just a lot of research on that. Check the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies. There's just some really remarkable things written about that.
That's interesting.
Good question.
Bob Burnell commented, and I've heard of this too, that birthmarks are scars from previous lives.
There you go.
You may have a birthmark or a certain kind of odd mole, and perhaps they were shot with an arrow where that mole is, or something.
Yep.
To that effect.
Yep. That's true. Nice job, Bob.
Joanne Stewart asks, I hope to be with my husband and daughter again, as I'm sure everybody wants to be with family and loved ones. Is that a guarantee?
Is it a guarantee?
A big question.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I know is that if that's your desire, it'll happen. And because there's no time up there, your husband could be off having 27 other lives, but there's time that he'll be able to spend that with you. In at least in every case that I've been able to uncover, now remember, I'm doing shared death and near death experiences. So, but if somebody wanted to have their husband or their son at the reunion, they were there. And it's about, I've done this work in hospice where you set up invitations. You send out invitations to who you would like to attend your reception party when you make your final transition. And it's a lovely thing.
Do you think there are soul families?
Yeah. And if they were if you had a son or a daughter, they, more than likely were in your soul family. And we have to remember too, that when we make that transition, the person that we're meeting on the other side is not just your husband. It's your husband in all of its forms. Sorry, I thought I'd turn that off.
No worries.
Okay.
Happens to all of us.
That was my mom. just checking in. That's great.
I don't know, you're having a good day because you're with Bigfoot and the bunny.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. And she's on the physical plane, so don't think that was
You're right. Well,
Right.
I know
I
that
get
phone
that.
calls. Yeah, that stuff.
it's
happens.
not like that orb that flew through on that clip that you showed, which was really quite remarkable.
I like the color of it. It was interesting.
Bright blue is
It's one of those
from
things kind of tough to prove either way, but
debunk, whatever. But
it did happen. So I had noticed it in real time and thought that was interesting. We have another question for you, and then we'll get back because I want to talk about your Hemisink records and what they can do for you, your library. But there's a question here. So hell does not exist, or thoughts on heaven and hell?
Hi there. Okay, so this is Scott Taylor's view. There's no hell. Is there a place where there are people who are confused and are held? Yes. And we know that from all of the soul rescue. And is that place determined by the cultural things that happen? Yeah. So if you expect to go up and, there's some great studies about, I forget which religion believes that you are awakened again when Jehovah blows his horn. So there are those folks who go up there and are resting in like a coma-like state, waiting for the horn to blow in order to re-enter into the
Based on their
non-physical world.
expectations of what happens when they pass,
So,
right?
yeah, if you have an expectation, if that's really what you want to have happen, you can make that happen. What seems to be the case, at least that as I've been able to discern from teaching soul rescue classes, is that the moment the person who's stuck realizes that there is an alternative and wants to leave and has a sincere desire to do so and reaches out, that's when everything changes. And so that seems to be the key, is that the person who's undergoing the stuckness needs to be able to go, I don't want to be here anymore. Isn't there any place else? I would really like to be with my mom and dad or grandpa and grandma. That's when it changes and help arrives. That's why it's so important when, like you were talking about, like young Toby, and Toby wanted to be with his mother.
yes.
And so when you're doing soul rescue stuff, it's like, oh, got it. That's the clue we need. And so you go in and say, Toby, I know where your mom is. Would you like to go with me and we'll go find her?
Yeah.
And, and Toby goes, oh, I can do that? I can go with you and find my mom? Absolutely. Come on, let's go. Done. So the desire is to be someplace else with somebody else and not in this stuck, confusing environment.
Right. And
So-
I think it is those stuck earthbound spirits that are responsible for a lot of the haunted phenomena people see, maybe even poltergeist phenomena.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't finish the story. Maybe the phone interrupted me about Bruce Grayson. And we were having this conversation about how culturally our near-death experiences are defined. And his theory, and one that I'm beginning to buy into, is that when we have an experience, like in a near-death experience, all of us have roughly the same experience. We are getting the original language from the universe, whatever that is. It's not English. So we're getting this information from the universe, and the only way that we can interpret it is with what is in our memory banks. So if there's this divine being in front of us, I grew up in the Presbyterian tradition. So, whoa, I mean, maybe it's Jesus, or maybe it's St. Paul. We had a lot of talking to with St. Paul. Or it's Mother Mary or something, something in the Christian tradition. If you're Native American, maybe it's your totem or an ancestor. Or if you're Hindu, you're going through the bardos. So that's what's lodged in our memory banks. And so that's what is pulled forth so that we can understand this language that's coming from the universe. And I think that's probably pretty close to the truth, that we interpret it with the kinds of symbology, the metaphors that we know. There's a great story that Bruce told me about this trucker, and he's having a near-death experiences, and he leaves his physical body, and he sees in front of him this pipe, and he's going, and he knows he's supposed to go down this pipe, and so he's describing it as, I left my physical body and I went right up this tailpipe until there was light at the other end of the tailpipe. Of course he went up a tailpipe. He's a trucker. That's what he knows. That's his metaphor. Other people call it a tunnel.
Right.
In certain traditions, it's about going through a well. And, so what is it?
In doing those mediumship courses, the communications I had that I feel very genuine were with deceased loved ones. It was like that. It was like looking at old time movies, or almost seeing words I know, but not really hearing them, but just kind of seeing them kind of twisted. So I knew the meaning, and imagery and symbiology played a big role. And It was like that stream of consciousness that I mentioned earlier. It felt very external, but there it was, all of a sudden I'm getting all this stuff flashing through my mind, and it made sense. And it made sense to me. It would probably make no sense to anyone else, but it made perfect sense to myself, probably because of my memories. Right.
Yeah. Suzanne Giesman taught me something really helpful. When you first start in this work, it takes a while to kind of get the hang of it, and you're trying to open up your antenna, and you're trying to figure out what's your method of communication, which of the senses, are speaking to. Anyway, so there's some getting used to being in the non-physical universe. And then once it kind of opens up, there can be, especially if you're doing, talking to dead people. I mean, there's a whole line of them, and they all, they all want to talk to you at the same time. You talk to Alice, talk to my, and Suzanne talks about, here she is taking a shower in the morning, and there's all these people yelling at her, and so her mentor said, you've got to have a Boris. She says, excuse me? Well, it turns out there are people in the non-physical world who are trained as gatekeepers. And her mentor called it Boris. And so she invited Boris into her life. And she and Boris have this relationship that said, when I do this certain meditation, that's when I want to have information, I want to get information from dead spirits. And unless it's an emergency, you know, your job is to wait until I'm open for business.
Right.
And that's what Boris does. He lines them up. He pulls in the right person. So, you know, in her case, she's doing a medium, you know, with Chris, and Chris says, I want to see my, you know, I want my grandmother Harriet, you know, and so Boris goes and gets Harriet and puts her at the front of the line and and arranges the whole thing. Really helpful concept that
That's
there's
interesting.
someone out there who can act as a gatekeeper for you and help organize everything. And it makes your confidence in mediumship just skyrocket.
It helps.
You can count on Boris.
Right. It helps as well as to try to close everything off. Like you were saying, she's in the shower and getting yelled at constantly.
You got you can relate to that a little bit, right?
Or here she is trying to sleep at night, and there are all these people coming.
And other psychics have told us, like, that's the hard part, is like turning it off. Because like once that door is open too wide,
that's it.
They all come rushing through, and it's hard to focus on one thing.
You got to have Boris.
You need a Boris. I love that.
She said she has it set up so it's kind of like, oh God, Rocky and Bullwinkle. Do you remember that old?
I love Rocky and Bullwinkle.
We actually were goofing on that a couple of months ago. We're Bigfoot and Bunny.
Bigfoot and Bunny.
Yeah, because we were goofing on the Rocky Bullwinkle thing. That's
so on that old cartoon show was Boris bad enough.
Yes,
bad
and
enough.
Natasha, I forgot.
And draw a blank, but yes, Boris and Natasha.
Yeah. Anyway, so in her case, she gave Boris that, that thick Russian accent sort of thing, and so
it's funny.
I will get squirrel.
Yes, moose and squirrel.
Moose and squirrel.
Another question out here from our friend Robert Honings. He asks, I apologize if you've spoken about this already. Actually, it's a good question, Robert, because we didn't actually say it outright. By looking at Dr. Taylor, I can see he's been blessed with certain sensitives. Can you ask him of his psychic abilities, childhood paranormal encounters, perhaps?
No, up until I had my shared death experience at 27, I was your standard small town, southern Minnesota, Presbyterian raised, regular old person. I was more sensitive than most as a kid, but I wouldn't have called it psychic. That changed when I had my shared death experience, and I had touched the light. And one of the things that happens to people who have touched the light, at least it did for me, it completely heightened my curiosity about all things spiritual. I had this burning desire to touch that space again. And because I'd said to myself, if I went there once, I know I can do it again. I just don't know how. And I traveled the world. I went all over. I went, to the pyramids and Stonehenge and the Oracle of Delphi and more cathedrals than you could shake a stick at. Point is, I was trying to find some sort of little juice or something that was in these places to help me, go back there again. And it didn't work that way for me. So I found teachers. I studied with shamans in both North and South America. I studied with the Emoto religion in Japan. I went to seminary. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I finally found my path at Monroe. They allowed me to enter into expanded states of awareness that allowed me to reestablish a relationship with Mary Fran and Nolan. And it allowed me to awaken my psychic self. And for me, that was just priceless. And so that's what I try to do with these albums that are behind my head there.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to get into those because I want our audience to understand what you have there. But just another add-on to Robert's question, do you find now that you've opened things up through Monroe, through this Hemisink, that these other abilities may have come into play now? Do you have like clairvoyant experiences or clairaudient where you hear a voice in an ear, maybe a particular ear, things of that nature?
Can you feel
Yeah.
clairsentient?
Well, it's really interesting. Thank you for that question, because I have a hard time distinguishing what is an after effect of the shared death experience and what is something that I developed through my work in Monroe. They're kind of, in my mind anyway, it's intertwined, and that's okay. Sensitivity to light and heat and medications. I have a weird one.
Do tell.
I have no earthly understanding why this would happen, but if it's, say, like twilight, that's a good time, or it's dark and I'm driving down the street lights will turn off as I get to them, and then they'll turn on as my car passes.
There you go.
I have heard of that.
My
that
mother
phenomenon.
do that.
Like,
Yes.
What is that? And
People
what
talk about
earthly use could I put that to?
It's
Mhm.
actually frequency and vibration, and I think it's from ourselves.
I think so too.
Yes.
It's like, well, all right. It's kind of a fun party trick, but
It's good to use at stoplights if you can harness that.
Yes.
yeah.
All green.
One of the things I think is interesting, and I use this a lot when I was teaching for Monroe, is that each of us have this energy around us. Monroe calls it a reball, a resonant energy balloon. And I know that when I'm speaking before a group, whether it's like a group where I'm doing a formal speech to 600 people or whatever, that if I take and expand my energy balloon, my energy body, to include everybody that's in the room,
Mhm.
they understand me not only with their ears, but with their heart.
Yes.
And so they get whatever I'm teaching on multiple levels. And I'm a much more effective communicator when I'm able to do that.
That's amazing.
I love that.
Yeah.
You should. So I spent 20 years of my life mentoring small business owners for the state of Minnesota. Yeah, you should see how it works when I'm talking about accounting.
Imagine. It must be fun.
QuickBooks.
I sometimes
Let
think
me
about
show you how the homepage works.
right? I sometimes think about that when we do the show, and I think about us all kind of being in a group, in a circle, and it's just a mental thing I'm doing in my head, but sounds very similar to that.
Yeah. I think, and it makes a real difference. And so, as much as we are able to impart our energetic being into this interview, people get it, and they understand, like my experience with Mary, Fran, and Nolan, differently than if I hadn't done that, and I do.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating, and that's great information. So we talked a bit about the Monroe Institute, started by Robert Monroe as a research and development project from his sleep learning studies.
Yep.
He had started back in like 1956, and he started the Monroe Institute in 1962. Discovered out-of-body experiences in 1958, and has written extensively about it. So there's a lot of history in the Monroe Institute. This isn't just something that popped up out of nowhere and we're doing this. There's a lot of time and dedication behind it, and one of the offshoots of it was Hemisink, and we talked about how it can change, literally sync the hemispheres of the brain together to go into those beta, alpha, theta, and data states. And you have a collection of recordings that people can purchase CDs and download and stuff that are directly related to what we've been talking about. So can you tell us about that?
You bet. One of the things I'd like to do is just do a shout out to Bob Monroe for just a second, because one of the things I most respect about him was he was a true pioneer. He is, this is 1956, and we're talking about out-of-body experiences. What we didn't know about out-of-body experiences then was everything. And he was a true pioneer, discovering a land that Westerners really hadn't delved into. And when he wrote his first book, Journeys Out of the Body, he did the best that he could to describe what had happened to him in the previous 15 years, about how he got into it and what he discovered along the way. He wrote a second book, and in the second book, he did a wonderful thing, which was to say, remember what I told you in the first book? I now have a different understanding of it. So what I told you before is sort of kind of true, but I'd like to explain it further. And then he did the same thing in the third book. He said, remember what I told you in book number 2? I have a different understanding now. Let me explain it this way. So he's very much data driven, and it's one of the lovely things about the Monroe Institute is that there is a real intention to not be stuck in dogma. And anytime you're teaching something, you're trying to be true to the essence of the whatever it is you're teaching. But over time, those of us that are instructors, we learn a lot from our students, from the work we do ourselves, and it evolves over time, so that it's a we just know a lot more about out-of-body experiences than we did back in 1956.
Absolutely. You open the doorway for it.
Yeah, it isn't that a wonderful thing?
How far that much
which leads me
50s, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which leads me into your question, which is, so what about this? So hang on. There we go. So I've been teaching at the Monroe Institute for like 25 years, and the Institute has a particular cosmology, meaning in Bob Monroe's mind, the non-physical universe is organized in a certain way, and there are places that you go, and there's certain vibrations that you use called focus levels to help you get there and do certain things. Great. It's a wonderful set of skills, meditative skills. And I don't know why it took me so long, but I had this brainstorm. It's like, well, why can't I use these same skills to teach people how to go to the same places that near-death experiencers go to? Because these vibratory focus levels, some of them are sort of close, and so that's what I did. I worked with the Hemisink folks. We tweaked Hemisink to get it to be at the vibration of, say, the tunnel, or the vibration of the reunion party, or the vibration of the life review, or that wonderful area of life between lives, the park. And so it allows people through, there we go. It's Into the Light is the name of the series. And all right, here's a little brag. This was the #1. It was the best-selling CD. It was the largest launch of any CD that Hemisink did until Suzanne Giesman, who then toasted my record. But when you have a near-death experience, you're thrown into an environment you're totally unfamiliar with. And we know, using guided meditations, that you can visit those same places, but do it gently, without the physical trauma, and with a whole set of skills. So once you're there, you know how to communicate with a divine being. You know what kinds of things a divine being is capable of. you know, and how they can assist you during a life review. How do you invite people to your reunion party? And it's just, there's just so many things that we now know how to do, because we've taken the time to learn what the tools and techniques are. A case in point, what happened to me with Nolan during his transition was that I bilocated, and I went, okay, if that happened to me, I bet we could teach that. And it took me a while, but I figured out a method to teach people how to be in two places at the same time. And then shortly thereafter, you can learn how to be in three. And it's not that hard to learn. And it's a really effective way of traveling the non-physical universe, to be able to say, I know I'm in my physical body. I'm sitting in my chair in my house, and my consciousness is with my, dead grandma Ginny, and we're having a conversation. Or in my case, I have all kinds of really wonderful conversations with Nolan. We have a special place that we meet, and it's just lovely. We continue to have that relationship to this day.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of having people who've been there, done that, and they can teach you the shortcuts. So you don't have to spend, like Suzanne Giesman, back to her again. She tells the story. It took her a year of meditating before she finally got to have a conversation with her deceased stepdaughter. And she is a very disciplined person. And it finally worked for her. Well, you don't have to spend a year. You can do guided meditations using Hemisink, and you can go and visit those people. And anyway, it's
so with your Into the Light series, let's focus on your series, because we're not encouraging people to have necessarily a near-death experience, or we're encouraging them to expand their conscious awareness, so you can talk to people that are deceased. Or what are some of the other things, maybe just short term, like what can they expect from going through this series of meditations?
So in near-death experiences, people are often curious about, well, what's the tunnel good for besides, as a method of moving from here to there? Well, it's filled with amazing things, so you can explore that. In particular, I'm a fan of going to that area of the life between lives, because that's where the Akashic records are. That's where all of the universities are. That's where the professional centers are. That's where, those ideas exist in the non-physical before they come into the physical. Well, you can watch them being birthed in the non-physical. So it's this incredibly rich area. The Healing and Regeneration Center is there. Just the reception center is kind of fun to hang out in. So it's it's kind of like, well, what's your interest? Case in point, I'm teaching a class called Near Death Intensive, and it's where we teach people to go to all of these different places. And we're now at the point where we're in an exercise where we're going to the park, and I'm having people go to, areas of interest for them. And we come back, and afterwards we have a sharing circle, and people say, well, where'd you go? Where'd you go? Oh, that was interesting. And this one guy pipes up and he goes, you know what? I've always been curious about humor. Where do jokes come from? Like that one. And he said, so he went up into the park, and he met somebody and asked him, "Where's the Center for Humor? I want to know how jokes are formed." So he goes into this building, and there's a big room, and it's filled with round tables. There's about 8 people at each of these tables. And he said it was just so wonderful because they were sitting around having a very earnest discussion about what made that joke funny. And he said just that in itself was funny, that people would spend time analyzing what made jokes funny. Anyway, so if you're interested in baking or landscaping or photography or whatever, there's a center up there that you can go and explore.
You can connect to through these deep guided meditations.
Yeah, there's all kinds of help. One of the things that we teach people to do, we call it the Council of Friends. These are the folks that helped us design our life in the physical. So they came and helped give us input as to some of the things that we might want to consider learning when we come into our life in the physical. And it's a whole team. And in my case, some are human, some aren't human. It doesn't make any difference. And so when we do this kind of an exercise, you can go in and check in with your council of friends and say, how am I doing? I set out on this path. This is what I wanted to accomplish. Am I close? Is there any other tools that I need? Do I need to augment my skill set in any way? So that was one of them.
Would that be a good place to get a Boris?
Yeah. Yes. And there's another one we go to, which is called that I call the Council of Self, which is so in my case, my Council of Self, there's I was a Boy Scout, so there's a fire in the woods, and around this fire there's logs, and sitting on these logs is Scott Taylor at different ages of my life. So I'm 7 and 12 and 16 and 18, and they're all of me is sitting around, and I enter into conversations with me, and I'm reminded of what are the things that I love to do as a young boy or as a young man, or is there wisdom that my future self can give me so that I understand the transitions that I'm going through. It's an incredibly heartfelt and wonderful way to get information. I'm learning how to set those up right now with my other lives. It seems to be a little different arrangement, so I have to work on that a little bit. But that's in the future sometime.
It sounds a little like a kind of ayahuasca trip without the trip to Peru and loss of body fluids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's a better way to go.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's one of the things that I appreciate about the meditation method is that that we do it without drugs, and we at least at Monroe, we're really adamant, don't do them when you're here during the week, because you don't know whether it was the drug doing it or you're doing it.
Right, because you're trying to study to make sure.
Yeah, and if there's doubt in your mind, but boy, there's something really empowering about saying, I talked to my dead Uncle Ed, and we had this conversation, and I learned X, Y, and Z, and boy, was that impactful for me. That really helped heal a wound, or I now understand my family history better than I did before, or I didn't know him very well. He was 90 when I remember him. What was he like as a young man, and what were his hopes and dreams? And it's to have that kind of validation is really important in this work. So I know that in like the mediumship things that you've been doing, you know, a large part of that is confidence, is to say, I want to visit, you know, Aunt Audrey, and put out the intention that this is who I want to talk to today. And it happens because we are so clear and so confident that it will happen, that it does happen.
Mhm.
And
Make it happen, Captain.
make it happen, Captain. And it's hard to do if you mix that with drugs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Right now, I'd like to share your website with our listeners and viewers. The name of the website is neardeathmeditations.com if you're listening. And so let me just go here and click the special button to bring it up.
I love special buttons.
I know.
There we go. I'm
Make
going
me
to go
laugh,
back to
yeah.
StreamYard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so here we are.
There.
These are your albums here. The Into the Light series available through Hemisink. Right, you can get right through your website, and you can download this too. So you don't need to have a CD player. You know, unfortunately, as we get older, we have less things like that. Although I have a 15-year-old that loves albums. You know, so you know, there you go. There's another free flow meditations, meeting your guides. There you go, for meeting spirit guides, exploring the tunnel, embracing source, radiating love. These are wonderful things. And you know, we can personally attest to the power of Hemisink as
Absolutely.
we're fans, hence having the t-shirt on here. It looks like you also do other presentations and you have retreats set up, and you do them over Zoom. Did you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. They're 5.5 days long, and we make the trip to, you know, that transition trip about 25 times during the course of the week. So by the end of it, people really know what it is that will happen at their transition. Who's going to be their guide, who's going to be at the party, how to find their way to the divine being, and doing the life review, and how to navigate around the crystal cities, you know, find the Akashic records, and all of that. We do it ahead of time. They're fun to visit. And at the very same time, what we're doing is teaching people navigational skills so that they know how to move around the non-physical universe. And at the end of the week, you know, to a person, they sit there and go, you know, I'm not afraid of dying. You know, I know it's going to happen, and it's going to be a hoot. So that has this wonderful side benefit of allowing us to live more fully here in the physical world. That's really why we do this, is so that we can lose our fear of death and to go, let's embrace living while we have this tremendous gift of being in duality. This is, you know, it's a very brief moment in time, and there's so much to learn from being in this physical space. Oh.
Memento mori, right? Remember, we will die, and embrace what's going on now. Be present.
Be present.
Yeah, that is a gift, and we often forget. We get very busy with our lives, and there's so many distractions, and it's almost like we're intentionally kept busy. Being present, it seems so important, and it seems like there's a lot to learn in these CDs. I want to explore them and download them and try them myself, because this looks amazing. This has been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you so much.
May I throw in one more piece?
Absolutely.
Okay. So these CDs are built around the concept that there are 3 different lights that people encounter in the near-death experience. Not many people have spent much time working with that, but there's the white light, which, you know, the white light at the end of the tunnel, we've all seen that. There's clear light, and there's black light. And the white light at the end of the tunnel is very intense. It's if you were to look at it, you you would say it's as bright as a million suns, but because we're using our non-physical eyes, it doesn't hurt them. And the folks that I've talked to that have been in the white light, the really clever ones, have looked around behind them to see if there's a shadow, and there isn't. And what that means is that we are, we become one with the light. We are this brilliant, white, loving light. Clear light is what happened to me. If we were having a clear light experience right now, everything in the room would start exuding its own light. And pretty soon you would begin to realize that everything is made up of light. Everything is the vibration of this loving universe, and we are part of that. And that we are ourselves, and we are connected with the whole. Black light, on the other hand, is an extraordinary thing. Everybody that I've talked to, almost everybody, when they talk about their black light experience, they cross their arms in front of them and they kind of do this little rocking motion, and they tell me about how they were held, how they were loved, how unconditional this love is. And they use the term, "This is the womb of God." Isn't that a wonderful statement? The womb of God.
Wow.
And so if you are Genesis 2 fans, in that second sentence in the Bible, it talks about, at the beginning there was the deep, the void. That's where you go. It is before everything. It's the source of everything. Light came out of there. All of physical existence came from this source. And that's what that album is about, is how to touch that place again.
Maybe that's what science refers to as the Big Bang, right there.
There you go.
The
So
first-
it's the whole series is designed to help people understand the magnificence and the complexity of the non-physical universe. We can do it at home. It's a little slower. If you do it in a class, we've got a whole bunch of people doing it at exactly the same time. So this group intention and group energy helps propel everybody to even a greater adventure. So
I'm sure people could ask questions and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, and I've got a great co-trainer,
Topic.
Dr. Charlene Nicely. She really helps me out and lends a different whole perspective. It's nice to go into these meditative states, and when we're talking about them later in the sharing circle, to have two different lenses on them. Anyway,
It sounds so fascinating.
That's
I'd love to
awesome.
take part in something like that.
Yes,
I think we
both
would really enjoy that. As I
Absolutely.
understand it, the Monroe Institute has some kind of physical map of the non-physical universe too, right? And I think you've kind of hinted about that a little bit.
Yep.
Is that a real thing? There's like a map and you can go and
There's
see
a map. You
Yeah.
can go there.
You
There's
can get
stuff to do at each one of these little places. Yeah.
I love
That's
that.
awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Well, we thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything you did today with us. That you do, I should say, with us.
Yes, thank you for
Yes,
sharing your
thank
story about Nolan.
Yes.
I know that was touching for you, and I'm sure
Heartfelt and-
our audience could relate in some ways. And your products seem amazing.
Yes.
Into the Light collection from Hemisink. The website is neardeathmeditations.com. Dr. Scott Taylor, this has been a joy.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Chris and Kristen, it has been a joy. I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for the invitation.
Us as well.
Welcome. Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for Bigfoot and the Bunny this week. Stay present out there,
Stay
our
present.
friends. So I'd like to thank everybody, Robert Honings, Ken Allen, Joshua Dixon, all you guys, Bob Burnell, Joanne Stewart. We love you all. Thank you for making this an interesting broadcast, and thank our guest Scott again for joining us. This has been great. We'll see you next Thursday on the Dark Horse Paranormal Podcast. Take care.